When a person cannot say no, it is rarely about kindness alone. At its core, it is driven by a quiet but persistent fear of rejection. Deep within the psyche, there is a belief that acceptance is fragile, that love can be withdrawn at any moment. So agreement becomes a form of protection. By saying yes, they attempt to secure their place in the social world, to avoid the discomfort of being seen as difficult, selfish, or replaceable. From a psychological perspective, this fear is not irrational. It is often rooted in early experiences where approval was conditional. When affection depended on compliance, the mind learned a simple rule: connection must be preserved at all costs. Over time, this rule hardens into identity. The individual no longer asks, "Do I want this?" but instead, "Will this keep me accepted?" Carl Jung observed that what we fear most is often what we have not yet integrated. The inability to say no reveals a disowned part of the self, the part that believes it has the right to choose. Until that fear is faced, the pattern repeats, quietly shaping relationships and decisions. The moment you risk disapproval for the sake of truth, you discover something essential. Rejection may wound the ego, but self-betrayal wounds the soul. For many who struggle to say no, self-worth is quietly measured by usefulness. They feel valuable only when they are needed, helpful, or indispensable to others. This creates a subtle psychological trap. Instead of asking who they are, they focus on what they provide. Approval becomes evidence of worth, and exhaustion becomes proof of loyalty. This pattern often forms when affirmation is inconsistent. When love or recognition arrives mainly in response to effort, the psyche learns to perform for belonging. Over time, the individual stops recognizing intrinsic value and begins to equate identity with service. No then feels dangerous, not because it harms others, but because it threatens the very foundation on which their self-image is built. Jung spoke of the danger of identifying with a single role. When a person becomes only the helper, the giver, or the reliable one, they lose contact with the deeper self that exists beyond function. The tragedy is not that they give too much, but that they give. In order to feel real, true self-worth is not proven through sacrifice. The moment you stop earning your value and start recognizing it, the word no transforms from a threat into an act of self-respect. For many people, the inability to say no is not a conscious choice, but a conditioned response formed long before adulthood. In early life, the mind is highly adaptive. It learns what keeps ion intact and what threatens it. When approval, safety, or affection depended on obedience, compliance became a learned language of survival. Saying yes was rewarded, while resistance carried emotional consequences: withdrawal, tension, or shame. Over time, the nervous system remembers this pattern even when the original environment no longer exists. The body reacts before the mind can reason. Guilt arises instantly. Anxiety tightens the chest, and the impulse to agree feels automatic. This is not weakness, it is conditioning. The adult may be fully capable, yet emotionally bound to rules written in childhood. Jung understood that the past does not disappear. It lives on as unconscious habit. Until these early imprints are made conscious, the individual mistakes old fear for present reality. Thank you. They respond to authority, expectation, and need as though the child self is still at risk. Freedom begins not with force, but with awareness. When you recognize that your fear belongs to an earlier chapter of your life, you reclaim the right to choose in the present, and choice is where psychological maturity truly begins, one of the strongest forces keeping a person trapped in constant agreement is guilt. Even when there is no direct pressure, guilt appears internally, convincing them that saying no would make them selfish, ungrateful, or unkind. This guilt is rarely imposed by others in the present moment. It is self-generated, shaped by long-standing beliefs about responsibility and morality. The individual feels responsible not only for their actions, but for the emotions of those around them. Psychologically, this creates a distortion of boundaries. Instead of recognizing where their responsibility ends, they absorb the emotional weight of others' expectations. They sense discomfort and immediately move to relieve it, even at the cost of their own well-being. The result is a quiet erosion of self-trust. Each unchosen yes reinforces the idea that personal needs are secondary, even illegitimate. Jung warned that what is consistently ignored within the psyche does not vanish. It turns inward. Guilt-driven compliance often leads to resentment, fatigue, and a growing sense of inner division. The person appears generous on the surface, yet inwardly feels depleted and unseen. Healthy boundaries are not acts of rejection, they are acts of psychological clarity. When gui no longer dictates your decisions, you begin to live from intention rather than obligation. When a person repeatedly says yes against their own inner resistance, something important happens beneath the surface. Anger does not disappear simply because it is unexpressed. It turns inward. The individual may not feel rage in the dramatic sense, but it emerges as irritability, anxiety, chronic fatigue, or a quiet sense of bitterness toward others. This is the psychological cost of unspoken no. From a Jungian perspective, suppressed anger becomes part of the shadow, the rejected aspect of the self that carries instinct, assertiveness, and self-protection. When this energy is denied conscious expression, it seeks indirect outlets. The person may criticize themselves harshly, withdraw emotional, or feel inexplicably overwhelmed by small demands. What appears as weakness is often misdirected strength. The tragedy is that the anger is not aimed at others, but at the self. Each time a boundary is ignored, the psyche receives the message that its signals do not matter. Over time, this creates inner conflict and emotional exhaustion. The body begins to speak through tension, restlessness, and burnout, attempting to restore balance where the mind refused to listen. Anger, when understood, is not destructive, it is informative. The moment you honor it as a signal, rather than suppress it as a flaw, you reclaim the power to protect your inner life. Learning to say no is often misunderstood as an act of resistance, but psychologically, it is an act of self-recognition. It is the moment. The individual acknowledges their limits, their values, and their right to choose. Those who fear this step often imagine that boundaries will cost them connection, yet the opposite is usually true. What disappears is not love, but illusion, the illusion that belonging requires self-erasure. Jung believed that individuation begins when a person separates from unconscious expectations and begins to, from an inner center. Saying no is one of the earliest expressions of this process. It reveals who respects you, who benefits from your silence, and where your life has been shaped more by fear than by intention. Boundaries clarify relationships. They do not destroy them. As the capacity to say no strengthens, something subtle but powerful changes. The individual no longer reacts automatically to guilt or pressure. Choice replaces compulsion. Energy returns. Respect grows quietly, without the need for explanation or defense. What once felt dangerous becomes natural. In the end, no is not a rejection of others, it is a declaration of presence to yourself. And he life you build from that place will finally feel like your own.